The drama surrounding Joanie Lamb and the Daystar empire is one of those stories that grips people not because it is full of fast action or shocking twists, but because it reveals something deep about power, faith, family, and the human heart. It is the kind of story people follow silently, even when they swear they are not interested, because something about it refuses to leave their minds. It is the kind of drama that lingers not in the headlines, but in conversations, in doubts, in private questions people ask about leaders they once trusted. And at the center of this long, unending cloud of controversy stands one woman whose name has become inseparable from the saga, Joanie Lamb. Her rise, her struggles, her decisions, and her public battles form the spine of a story that many hoped would fade, but instead kept returning, again and again, demanding attention. To understand why this story refuses to fade, you must go back to the beginning, before the scandals, before the fights, before the online debates and accusations that divided a global Christian audience. Once upon a time, long before the storms, Joanie Lamb was simply a woman following a vision. Alongside her husband Marcus Lamb, she became one of the most recognizable faces in Christian broadcasting. Together they built Daystar, a television network that grew from humble equipment into a global powerhouse. Their goal was simple on the surface: preach the gospel to the world. But behind that mission was a hunger to build something enduring, a ministry that would outlive them, a legacy that would testify to their faith. People who watched Daystar in those early years often felt a sense of closeness to Joanie. She spoke with softness, with a kind of calm conviction that made viewers feel seen and heard. She interviewed pastors, celebrities, doctors, authors, and struggling believers with the same gentle tone. Many saw her as the emotional core of Daystar. Where Marcus delivered fiery teachings and bold declarations, Joanie offered warmth and empathy. In the eyes of their audience, they balanced each other perfectly. But as Daystar grew into a massive institution, with millions of dollars in donations flowing in, a global broadcasting reach, and partnerships with some of the most powerful figures in Christian media, the pressure built quietly beneath the surface. The first major fracture in the perfect image appeared in 2010, when news broke that Marcus had been unfaithful. It was a moment that shocked the entire Christian world because Marcus and Joanie had been presented as the model Christian couple, one whose marriage was supposedly built on unshakable values. When the affair came to light, it wasn't just a private family matter. It became a public crisis. There were whispers that ministry funds had been used improperly, that expensive gifts and trips had been paid for to maintain the hidden relationship, and that some staff members knew more than they ever admitted. Joanie went on air, sat beside Marcus, and the couple tearfully confessed that their marriage had gone through a season of pain. Marcus called it an inappropriate relationship. Joanie called it emotional, then improper. Their supporters embraced them. Critics accused them of hiding the full truth. And though Daystar survived the crisis, something quietly changed in how people viewed the Lamb family. The image of perfection was gone, replaced by a more complicated reality. Still, Joanie pressed on. She forgave, rebuilt, and continued to lead alongside Marcus. For years after the scandal, Daystar regained stability. Their shows grew even more popular. Joanie's Table Talk became one of the network's most watched programs. People admired her strength. They respected her resilience. And for a while, it looked as though the crisis had become just a chapter in a long story, painful but closed. Then came 2021, the year Marcus Lamb died. His death shook not only the Lamb family but the entire Daystar community. Whether people agreed with Marcus or not, he was a giant in religious broadcasting. Losing him meant losing a key voice, a founder, and the visionary behind the empire. But it also meant something more subtle. It left Joanie alone at the helm. And the weight of an entire ministry, one built with equal parts faith and controversy, fell squarely on her shoulders. People watched closely as Joanie stepped into full leadership. They wondered how she would navigate a ministry built with her husband's fire, his personality, and his influence. Some believed she would carry the torch gracefully. Others believed internal conflict would eventually rise. And they were right. Conflict did rise, and not slowly. Not quietly. Not behind closed doors. The next storm arrived in late 2024. And it didn't just rock Daystar. It exploded into public view with a force that surprised even long-term observers of the Lamb family. This time, the scandal didn't involve donors, spending, or marriage. It involves something far more painful and far more sensitive: an allegation of child sexual abuse within the family itself. Jonathan Lamb, the son Joni had raised in front of television cameras, and his wife Susie, released a statement accusing a male family member of sexually abusing their young daughter. They said they had taken the matter to the family first, trusting that church leaders and relatives would do the right thing. But instead of support, they claimed they were discouraged from going to the authorities. According to their version of events, they were told to pray, to calm down, to handle things internally. They said the ministry was feared to be at risk if the police got involved. They said their daughter's pain was overshadowed by the fear of a scandal. Almost immediately, the Christian community erupted into debate. Half believed Jonathan and Susie, half believed Joni. And the more each side spoke, the worse the public tension grew. Joni responded swiftly and firmly. She denied every part of the alleged cover-up. She insisted that she had never blocked a report to the authorities. She claimed internal investigations had been done, that everything pointed to misunderstanding, exaggeration, or miscommunication. She said the allegations were absolutely a lie. She described the growing narrative online as something written by a low-level blogger who wanted to destroy her family's reputation. But Jonathan and Susie doubled down. They insisted their daughter had been hurt. They insisted Daystar was protecting the accused family member. They insisted the ministry cared more about image than truth. And when police became involved, the story gained even more traction. For months, the audience watched as statements were released from one side, then the other. Supporters fought each other online. Critics said the case proved long-standing claims that religious empires often hide their worst secrets. Supporters said the accusations were an attack of the enemy, a spiritual warfare meant to damage the Lamb legacy. While public speculation burned, the internal family relationships fractured beyond recognition. There were rumors of shouting matches, legal threats, pressured non-disclosure agreements, and painful emotional outbursts behind the scenes. In one version of events, Jonathan and Susie were forced out of Daystar, pushed aside for refusing to stay silent. In another version, they left voluntarily to protect their daughter from an environment they described as spiritually toxic. Whichever version people believed, one truth became undeniable: the Lamb family was broken in a way the world had never seen before. Eventually the police closed the case, saying there wasn't enough evidence to move forward. Legally, the chapter ended. Publicly, the fire continued to burn. Many questioned whether the lack of evidence meant lack of truth. Others believed the closure proved the allegations were false. But the damage, emotional, relational, spiritual, was irreversible. A line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. And the public found itself watching a modern religious dynasty crumble from the inside. What made the drama even harder to escape was the way it resurfaced old wounds. The affair. The money questions. The luxurious spending that critics often suspected was funded by donors. The accusations of controlling leadership behind the scenes. Issues that had faded into silence suddenly came alive again. People began connecting dots, asking questions, wondering whether Daystar had always been honest with them, or whether the ministry had spent years polishing an image while hiding uncomfortable truths. And through it all, Joni remained at the center, calm on camera, firm in her denials, sometimes emotional, sometimes angry, but always presenting herself as the one trying to hold everything together. Whether people believed her depended on how they interpreted her tone, her words, her expressions, and her long history of surviving storms. To some, she was a mother unjustly attacked by her own children. To others, she was a leader who had grown too powerful, too insulated, too protected to admit when things had gone wrong. This tension between admiration and suspicion is what keeps the story alive. Because the truth is, there are very few figures in Christian media who have the kind of influence, history, and complicated legacy that Joanie Lamb has. And when someone like that faces such a storm, people cannot look away. As the noise around the accusations settled into a steady, endless rumble, something strange began to happen around the Daystar story. People who had never watched the network found themselves glued to every update. Those who once ignored Christian media were suddenly following every twist. Even people who had no connection to faith or religion began to analyze the story like it was a complicated family drama, unfolding in slow motion. And the more people watched, the more they realized the deeper issue was not simply whether the allegations were true or false, but whether a large religious empire could continue functioning without collapsing under the weight of its own secrets and its fractured leadership. It was during this period that Joni's public persona became even more central to everything. She spoke more boldly on camera. She positioned herself as the defender of the ministry, the guardian of the legacy she and Marcus had built. And the way she spoke, calm, articulate, controlled, made some people feel even more convinced of her innocence. Yet for others it looked like someone who had mastered the art of public image, and was now using that skill to protect herself at all costs. The divide between these two groups widened with every passing month. At the same time, the Lamb children took different positions publicly. Some stayed loyal to Joni. Some stayed quiet. And one, Jonathan, refused to back down. This created an emotional battle that viewers could feel even without seeing behind the scenes. Children at war with their mother. A mother at war with her son. A ministry caught in the middle. Donors asking questions. Critics celebrating the chaos. Supporters praying for healing. The story became bigger than just the Lambs. It became symbolic of what happens when faith, power, family, money, and influence collide without accountability. For many, the case became a mirror. People saw in it the same issues they had seen in their churches, their families, or their own experiences with religious leadership. That was why it refused to fade. It carried something universal, something human. Through all this, Joni continued building her public presence. She traveled. She preached. She connected with other influential Christian figures. She kept her show alive, interviewing guests and discussing topics that had nothing to do with the controversy swirling around her. She began appearing more frequently in events and conferences, reminding audiences that she was still strong, still standing, still committed to the mission. To her supporters, this was proof of courage. To her critics, it felt like selective distraction. And both sides became even more stubborn in their positions. It was as though the story had settled into people's minds like permanent ink. But beneath the television lights and polished speeches, something else was happening. Something more subtle, more emotional, and more revealing of the deeper truth of leadership. Those closest to Joni observed a shift. Where she had once been the softer, nurturing face of Daystar, she now carried a more commanding tone. The responsibilities that once rested on Marcus were now fully hers. Decisions that once could be shared were now fully her burden. And with each new decision came a new expectation, a new criticism, or a new pressure point. Whether she wanted it or not, the empire demanded a leader who could not afford to show weakness. And so she hardened, not visibly but quietly, in ways only those closest to her could truly see. It wasn't something malicious. It was survival. When the world is watching, every expression becomes a message. Every silence becomes a statement. Every movement becomes a headline waiting to happen. And Joni had learned painfully that people would interpret her words in whatever way fit the story they believed. Still, what made everything more intense was the fact that the story involved not just a ministry, but a family. People felt emotionally invested because they had watched the Lamb children grow up on screen. They had seen pictures of birthdays, family vacations, ministry events, and emotional moments. They had watched Joni cry on camera. They had watched Marcus preach with fire. They felt like they knew the family personally, even though they didn't. The illusion of familiarity made the betrayal, whichever side people believed, feel personal. And so the public kept watching, waiting, analyzing, dissecting small comments, tiny details, and every new piece of information. The story became a kind of emotional puzzle that people wanted to solve, even though the full truth would never be publicly known. During this time, Daystar's internal morale began to shift as well. Quiet resignations. Silent discomfort. Staff members who had been loyal for decades found themselves torn between personal loyalty and their own doubts. Stories leaked. Former employees spoke anonymously. Some defended the ministry passionately. Others suggested that the culture behind the scenes had long been tense, controlled, and marked by an atmosphere where disagreement from within was interpreted as betrayal. As these whispers circulated, the public tried to determine what was real and what was exaggerated. Some believed the ministry was falling apart internally. Others insisted these were normal challenges for any large organization. But what truly kept the story alive, what made it refuse to fade from public memory, was the emotional weight carried by every part of it. This was not just a scandal. It was not just a controversy. It was a family crisis happening under global scrutiny. A mother trying to lead a ministry while facing accusations from her own son. A son trying to protect his child while believing that his own mother was standing in the way. A community of supporters stuck between loyalty and confusion. A world of spectators trying to make sense of events that seemed both deeply personal and strangely public. Eventually, as months turned into years, the heat of the controversy no longer burned with flames. It became something else. Something like a steady smoke that lingered in the air, never disappearing fully. Every time Joni appeared on stage, the story resurfaced in comments. Every time Daystar posted a photo, debates reappeared like reflexes. Every time a new Christian scandal hit the news, people referenced the Lamb story as a reminder that influence and integrity do not always walk together. And slowly, something important became clear. This story was never just about the allegations. It was about how people handle power, how they handle truth, how they handle failure, how they handle betrayal, how they handle leadership when it costs them the people they love. Over time, Joni rebuilt the public image of Daystar. She strengthened new alliances, launched new projects, and kept pushing the ministry forward. She acted as though the cracks in the foundation no longer existed. And in a sense, they no longer controlled the ministry's operations. But public memory does not work like a broken plate that you glue back together. It remembers the break. It remembers the fracture. It remembers the pattern of lines where things once fell apart. And so, even as Daystar moved forward, the story stayed alive in conversations, in articles, in online debates, and in the minds of viewers who had lived through the emotional storm. Meanwhile, the Lamb family never fully healed. There were reports of distance, avoidance, uneasy silence between certain family members. Holidays spent separately. Phone calls that never happened. Strong words that were never taken back. And people who once shared a home now shared only a complicated past. The world moved on, but within the family the pain stayed. And that was perhaps the most heartbreaking part of the entire story. Not the public controversy, not the accusations, not the headlines, but the private emotional wounds that time would never fully erase. Yet through it all, Joni remained a symbol of strength to her followers, and a symbol of secrecy to her critics. She became a person defined by two opposite truths depending on who you asked. And that dual identity, once established, could not be undone. It followed her everywhere. It shaped the way people saw every decision she made. It influenced the way audiences interpreted every expression on her face. It became part of her legacy whether she wanted it or not. And that legacy, the complicated, painful, powerful legacy of a woman standing at the center of faith, controversy, family war, and public scrutiny, is the reason the story of Joanie Lamb and the Daystar drama refuses to fade from public memory. Because it is not simply a religious story. It is not simply a scandal story. It is not simply a family story. It is a deeply human story wrapped in faith, shaped by ambition, touched by pain, pulled by loyalty, and stained by suspicion. It holds all the elements that make people keep watching even when they don't want to. It holds all the emotions that make people keep remembering even when they try to forget. And in the end, that is why years later, after the accusations have faded from news feeds, after the last public statements have been made, after the legal files have been closed, after the family has gone its separate ways, the story still lives in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. It remains because something in it speaks to a truth people rarely say out loud, that even the strongest leaders break, that even the purest missions become complicated, that even the prettiest families have hidden shadows, and that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought behind the camera, behind the podium, behind the polished stage lights. And so the world continues to watch Joanie Lamb. Not with the same loud debate as before, but with a quiet curiosity, a subtle awareness, a memory that refuses to erase itself. And every time she stands under the studio lights, every time she speaks on air, every time she posts a picture or makes an appearance, viewers around the world feel that same lingering thought rise inside them again. The sense that the story is not finished, that more lies beneath the surface, that the Daystar drama is part of a legacy that shaped a generation and will continue shaping conversations long into the future. Because some stories do not disappear. Some stories do not end when the legal case is close, or when the public attention shifts. Some stories take root in the collective memory and stay there, resurfacing again and again, reminding people of everything they saw, everything they wondered, everything they feared, and everything they learned. And the story of Joanie Lamb and the Daystar drama is one of those stories, enduring, unforgettable, and permanently woven into the public consciousness. It is a story that refuses to fade because it reveals something real about human beings and the complicated worlds they build. It refuses to fade because people still care. And it refuses to fade because at its center stands a woman whose life has been lived on a stage, under a spotlight, with every triumph magnified and every mistake multiplied. A woman who built an empire with her husband, lost him, fought for her family, defended her legacy, endured judgment, and walked through storms most people could never imagine. A woman whose name, for better or worse, will always be tied to the legacy of Daystar, and to the drama that shook a global audience and refused to let go. And that is how the story ends. Not with closure, not with certainty, not with a peaceful final scene, but with a lingering echo that continues to live in the minds of everyone who followed it. The kind of ending that feels less like a conclusion and more like a door left slightly open, reminding the world that some stories are too powerful, too emotional, and too deeply human to ever truly disappear.